Today on the podcast, I'm going to be speaking with a woman of color, biracial, and she's going to remain anonymous outside of the name of Sarah. Only she doesn't want to receive any backlash from friends, family, or the medical community in which she works. So buckle up for a amazing story of triumph and making her way through colorism and racism and everything in between. So stay tuned. Hello, everyone. This is Meredith with a Y, and I am your host, Meredith Willett. Today, we are going to go deep, changing lives, and I am giving you the keys to the castle. Here we are today with Sarah, and I'm super excited to have her here, as I am with all my guests. I know I say it all the time. I am super excited. And so Sarah decided to go by her first name only for this podcast because she wanted to be super truthful, honest, raw, etc., not guarded, no filters, and tell her story without the fear of any backlash from the medical community, her friends, coworkers, patients, whatever. Because Sarah, you're an audiologist, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so thank you so much for being here today and sharing your story. And I know this is a bit intimidating. And so I really appreciate you doing this with me.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to tell my story. It is a little intimidating, but I'm going to try to be as honest as I can be, and I hope that my story, you know, resonates with somebody.
Yeah. And so to give some background, and you are biracial. Your mother is white, and your biological father is Black. And remind me, your stepfather was white as well?
That's correct. My stepdad that raised me was white. He and my mom married when I was 2, so I didn't really have a relationship with my biological father, so it was my stepfather and my biological mother that raised me.
So when, like I keep saying to a lot of my other guests, is, when you looked up from the dinner table, you saw a bunch of white people staring back at you. And that was your experience. That was your experience as what the world looked like, what home looked like, and not what you necessarily look like.
Well, that's true. And I think that it's interesting, from a very young age. Well, I mean, really, for as far back as I can remember, I mean, my mom was white, my stepdad was white. I eventually they had a child together, and so my half brother is white, and all of my extended family were white. So yeah, for as far back as I can remember, everybody that I had any real affiliations with as far as the family, they were all white. I didn't have, as I think I said, I didn't have a relationship with my biological father for various reasons. But um, you know, I I I don't know that I felt any different
Right.
from them, and I think we'll get more into that as we go along. But yeah, I mean, every face that I ever really knew from a familial standpoint, as far as and even a friendship standpoint, for the most part, they were all white people.
Yeah. And the way you feel loved and accepted and the way you accept the world around you is very, um, you know, kind and sweet and childlike, and you think that the world meets you where you meet the world, but that wasn't necessarily true, because you did have, some situations with family, as you had mentioned, that wasn't always exactly what you would consider loving and accepting.
Well, that's true. As I mentioned, my mom married my stepdad, who I came to know as my dad. I've always called him my father, although he really isn't my biological father. But from a very young age, and I don't know that I even really recognized it at the time. But looking back on it as I got a little older, and even now looking back on it, there were times, um, even even stories that I heard, when I was a little older about the way that my mother's immediate family and extended family sort of accepted me into the family. It wasn't apparent to me at the time, but there were some concerns. I mean, this was the early '70s, and my mom was very young. I mean, she had me as a teenager, and so, I think there was a part of it was the fact that my mom was, gonna be bringing up a child as a teenager. But then, there was also that component of, her being a white mother and bringing up a black child sort of raised some concerns that I wasn't immediately aware of them, but, I came to hear over the years that there were some concerns expressed with my grandparents, that, maybe she should consider giving me up for adoption.
Wow.
Um, you know, and it's a little hurtful. I mean, I don't think that
Yeah.
it was anything that my mother ever considered,
Right.
you know, but
But
it, but
just that people said it and was, hey, let's, literally throw the baby out with the bathwater because of what we're dealing with here. And it's not just because you're a teen mom, it's because you're having a black child.
exactly, exactly. And then, I mean, there were other instances growing up where, I can remember, I have kind of a small family, and I had a cousin, a first cousin who I was pretty close with growing up. And I don't remember what age I was, but I remember at some point, um, my cousin suggesting to me something about me having been adopted.
Hmm.
And I was just kind of shocked and a little bit confused, like I wasn't adopted, you know.
Right.
And
Every kid's worst nightmare.
yeah, like, what was I
And now you're second
adopted?
guessing it like, wait, yeah, everyone around here is white, but me, maybe they're
Exactly.
on to something here.
Exactly. Is there something I don't know,
Right.
So
Yeah.
I had to sit down and have this conversation with my mom. And I think it was sort of hard for her to admit to me that, that it was difficult, I think, for some of the extended members of the family, because I was obviously, I mean, I can't pass for white.
Right.
I have a very medium skin tone, and kind of, somewhat ethnic hair. And I mean, I don't look white. So there really wasn't any way to pass me off for white. And I just remember having this conversation with my mother, being really confused, like, why is my cousin suggesting that he was told that I was that I was adopted, rather.
Mm.
And having my mom tell me, well, it was just a little easier. um it was just a little easier for the family, um particularly this one aunt, and uncle, to explain to their children from a young age that I was adopted, versus trying to explain, that I was black, and that my mom had me at a young age, and that my biological father wasn't in the picture. And it was kind of a complicated, um, and maybe uncomfortable story, but it was my reality. So
Yeah. You know what? As you're talking about this, I just keep flashing back to the Meghan Markle interview just from this, past month here,
mhm,
of where, everybody's uncomfortable. How dark is the skin? Is the, this cousin, this aunt, that grandparent, and everybody needs to be comfortable but the baby. It's
right,
like, what is happening, where all these adults need to be super coddled and comfortable with reality to the detriment of the child.
Right. Yeah. I mean, again, I was a little bit too young, I think, at that point in time to
Right,
really grasp the magnitude of, what was being done or what was being said, about me or in reference to me. But now I look back on it and I'm a little ashamed, I'm a little not ashamed of myself, I guess. I'm a little ashamed of the fact that, that some of my extended family felt the need to cover up my story or somehow obscure my identity and make me, not an immediate or biological member of the family um, in order to gain acceptance or, I don't know what the right word is, but
right.
yeah,
Make it make sense. So then you grew up towards a city, but then your family moved into the very white suburbs. Um, and that was again a new experience for you at school. And you started in the suburbs, was it, elementary school age?
that's true. So I was born, in the city. And my mom, I again had married my stepfather, and they weren't well off by any means, but they were able to financially to kind of make ends meet. um and this was this was by now I was about 6, I guess.
Mhm.
I had just finished kindergarten, going to school in the city, and they had started busing from
Mm.
one area of the city to another area of the city, in sort of in response to the uh,
Desegregation.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, I was in a position that I was going to be bused into, sort of the projects area of the city where my parents didn't really feel like I would, and my brother as well. He was a few years younger. He wasn't school age yet, but where I wouldn't be perhaps getting the kind of education that they had hoped for. Um, you know, my safety wise, they were concerned, because I was very young and I would be bused at quite a distance. And
Yeah.
so there were a lot of different concerns. And so at that point, they had decided to start looking to relocate us into the suburbs. And we did. We moved into a suburb that was predominantly white. I mean, when I say predominantly, I would say that
99.999.
percent.
Ugh,
Yeah, yeah.
right,
Yeah, I mean, going throughout throughout elementary school and junior high, there may have been like, one other black student in like the whole school system that would,
right.
pop in for a year and then, a year or two and then would pop back out. And it wasn't until high school that I started, I kind of formed a friendship with another black girl that had grown up in the same suburb. Um, and, but we were really, you know, some of the only two
Right.
in the city. I mean, it really was a very white suburban suburb. So it had some challenges.
What would you say, like, when looking back on that? Because, you and I have talked, and we talked about, it wasn't a big deal until it was. It wasn't discussed until sleepovers or having friends, you're invited over or whatnot, and then all of a sudden you're made aware of it. Your comings and goings of your day are very, you go to school, you have friends, you go to class, you get good grades, you're whatever, but now it's time to get a little bit more intimate of a friendship or, like I said, a sleepover, and that was a new challenge for you to experience from white people.
Right. Well, and so yeah, I mean, I think, it was very easy, um when my parents moved us into this suburb, now bear in mind, they were both white.
Mhm.
And so I think they moved into an area that they felt comfortable in, that they felt comfortable raising, my younger brother in. And they were accepted. There was never a question about whether they should be there or could afford to be there or were going to be welcome there. But I think there were some people in the community that became aware pretty quickly of my presence in the community, and perhaps didn't weren't really looking forward to a Black child being raised in this pretty white community. I can think of some instances. I mean, I can recall the very first weekend that my family moved in.
Mhm.
Some of the neighborhood children, were playing, and I can remember them yelling across the street. To me, I was out in the yard, by myself, and yelling across the street, and they were like yelling like racial slurs. And
Oh
now,
my
mind
god.
you, I was like barely 6,
Mhm.
you know, and I had never really heard these things before, so I didn't really know what they meant, but I felt like they were hurtful. I felt like I was being teased, or whatever. And I remember going in and then telling my mom, like, I think they're calling me bad names. I don't know. Cause my mom had just said, like, go outside and play,
Right.
make some friends. I mean, this is the 70s. So it wasn't like today where, parents were more helicopter parents, and rightfully so. But
Right.
you know what I mean? Watching your child's every move, and making sure that you know where they're at all times. It was like back then, you just kind of went
Got
out
on
and
your bike and went.
played. Yeah,
Yep.
you just went out and did your thing. So
Right.
she said, we'll just go out and play. There's kids outside playing, go make friends. But I remember like going in and telling my mom, like, they're kind of being mean to me, I think.
Mhm.
And I remember my mom just being really mad. And she like marched me across the street to like talk to these kids and their parents. And I just remember being like embarrassed, but I didn't really know what I was embarrassed about. It was just sort of, and I remember the parents kind of scolding their kids and saying, like, let's play nice, this little girl is new. Why don't you try to get to know her, and whatnot. And so, you know, and they honestly, ended up becoming some of my best friends
Mm.
growing up. And
Mhm.
I mean, I was, pretty quickly welcomed into the neighborhood, and and I didn't really have any further problems with them, from that point forward. But I can remember another instance. I was probably, I don't know exactly how old I was, maybe 7 or 8, because I guess I was probably just old enough to start learning like to read.
Mhm.
And I remember somebody, we had been out of the house for a period of time, and we came home, and somebody had spray painted the N word on the side of my house. Like literally
Wow.
spray painted it. And it said, go home, N word,
Right.
on the side of my house. And I remember my parents were just like, you know, I, I can
Devastated.
remember, like, yeah, like beside, like, I wasn't a, like, they wouldn't let me come out. I remember them like trying to, protect me. Like they didn't want me to see it, and trying to protect me. And they were out there like trying to clean it off and stuff. And there were remnants of it. So I kind of did see it. And I don't know if they repainted or what, but
Mm.
so, there were issues. So then, moving forward, yeah, I mean, I became, I started school, and all of the friends that I made were white, and um
You
I
didn't have another choice.
yeah, it wasn't even like a conscious
It
choice or
just was, right.
it was what it was, and that wasn't uncomfortable for me because again, everybody in my family,
Was
was
always white.
white, and so I didn't see them any differently than everybody else I was, comfortable with, and but I don't know that I realized that they or their families would see me differently.
Yeah.
That was kind of a rude awakening. And I guess it probably started. I don't know, later elementary school to early junior high. And I guess that's probably about the time you start having like birthday party sleepovers and stuff like that.
Right.
And I can just remember like some of the girls that I was, that I had become really close friends with would have like, birthday parties and would tell me like, I have to ask my parents if you're allowed to stay or
But she
you know,
wasn't
or
doing that for the other girls. It was just you. It was
it
like,
was it was just me, right?
yeah.
Or they would tell me like, you know, they would tell me after the fact, well, like, yeah, my dad wasn't very happy about it, but my mom talked him into it, and they
Yeah.
decided that it was okay for you to stay, kind of thing.
Mm.
And then and then I kind of became like the adopted black friend.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Mhm.
Like, these same parents that weren't comfortable around me or weren't comfortable with me around their children, as they got to know me and whatnot, like, I kind of like, I just ingratiated myself, I guess, and kind of became part of the family. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like it became accepted and just became like another daughter. And I think they were able to kind of see beyond race at that point, or at least see me beyond race. Now I say that because I feel like, again, I feel like I was kind of like the token accepted.
Well, it goes back to that kind of, well but you're okay. I
Mhm.
don't like black people, but that's not you. That's not how I see you.
Right. It's them. It's those ones that live
Right.
in the city.
Right.
You don't act like them
You
or
don't act black.
talk like
Jeez.
them.
Right.
Right. You know, um, yeah. So,
And all the while, that may be true, okay, whatever, but they're still talking about your skin color as being a broad stroke brush of negativity of some sort that you have managed somehow to leave, walk away from, not be a part of. And thank God you're like this, because if you were like that, then we wouldn't like you.
right.
It wouldn't be acceptable.
Yeah.
And let me ask you this, because, I always am kind of seeing all these different things as you talk. And, you know, I had a conversation with a gal, and she was raised by she was adopted from another country, and she was raised in a white family again when she looked up from the dinner table. And I asked her, I said, about the way she looked because she's Asian. And she said, sometimes I feel really beautiful and sometimes I look Chinese.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering how we're losing people's self-worth when they're raised by white people, regardless if they're their, biological parent or um, adopted or step or whatever. How different would that have been for your experience had your mom had a relationship with your black father or your black father's family and, spent time with other black people? Would that have helped you to know yourself on that side of the spectrum, color spectrum, a little differently, do you think? Because I really do believe this other gal would, and I, I've worked and talked with her about getting to know that side of herself and starting to learn to find beauty in her Asian heritage and learn more about it, because it was never introduced to her even, you
Right.
know? And so I'm wondering if we're kind of missing the boat on teaching children that are adopted or don't look like their parents for whatever reason, um, that we need to show them, it's used a lot maybe, but for a reason, that black is beautiful, and that if someone says something, that you don't have to make that side of yourself smaller to
Right.
be. acceptable and accepted both in your mind as a child and in the people that you're around, and to in that moment when the kid or the parent's not accepting you, so to speak, to just know deep down that you are beautiful and you do have this part of you that is very special, not something that needs to be shrunk down,
Right. You
you
know,
know?
it's it's really interesting because I mean, I think you're right in that I think if I had had more exposure maybe to um to the black culture
Yeah.
and to, that I might have had I don't know, a different outlook or on myself. It, it's so complicated for
It's
me
so yeah, it's different. I mean,
because
trust me, we're not gonna solve the biracial problem today, but I just think that we may, as a society, I think that it's important that we don't whitewash people.
right. Well, I mean, I can think of instances, and I can just think of like, I remember being pretty little and my mom had a friend that was married to a black man, um, and a best friend that
Mm,
was married to a black man. And so, we would spend, my parents and her and her friend and husband would get together and whatnot, spend time together. And I can remember like being around my mom's friends husband's family, and that's
mhm,
a lot of, but and they were black, and they just always, I can like they would always tell me how pretty I was, but they would always try to, I like to say, like, blackify me. They
right.
would, like, okay, so I would go over there and they would, and they would say, like, oh, you've got such pretty hair, like, let me braid it. And they would put it in these little tiny braids and stuff that, my mom didn't do that. My mom didn't, my mom
Mhm,
didn't know how to do my hair.
right.
I'll be honest, but, would like put like black hairstyles on me and stuff, and I think to them that made me prettier, you know.
Yeah.
And then I would get home and then my parents would go, oh, let's take those awful things out of your hair. Not
Oh,
because, I don't think so much because it was a black style, but just because it was, I don't know, because
but that goes back to Black Miss USA, and everyone says, "Well, why don't we have white Miss USA?" And there is a part of our culture that looks at white features, white beauty as being the end all be all.
right,
And even
the
though your
character,
your your mom wasn't necessarily thinking that, inside she was like, to me that's not what I find attractive.
right, right,
But to you, but to those people that had put those braids in your head, they find that black culture as being the predominantly beautiful. That is beautiful. Wide
right,
hips and full lips and, fuller hair. Those things, when seen through a person of color's eyes, is found to be beautiful.
right, right, right. So, I kind of felt like I just never really truly fit into one category,
Yeah.
like I wasn't really white enough to be white, but I was never really black enough to be fully black either. I didn't know anything or much about the black culture. I didn't wear my hair in, culturally black styles. I didn't speak in, Ebonics, or I didn't have any type of, I mean, I spoke very proper English because, you know, just because of the people that I was raised around, and, so, I don't know. I mean, I just,
But you're still dealing with this. I mean,
I,
this is
yeah,
why, the conversation I had with a Rachel Wade just recently on a podcast. Going back to your childhood would have been completely different. And hopefully our children will do better because we're teaching them that skin comes in a variety of colors. And this is what a Black person is. And this is how amazing their history is. And this is how we work together between the two cultures and yada, yada. And so now we can have and raise children that when they see a Black child, it's not the end of the earth. It's not earth shattering. But and
Well,
this is yeah, and this is why I think it's so important that we have these conversations, because you're still going through the which box do I check socially kind of. And you and I connected in a Facebook group. We've known each other before that, but we really started to share with each other and
talking about experiences. Yeah.
talking about experience, which that group led me to this entire series of really diving deep. But you and I watched you and you expressed to me that same sentiment in this group of Black people and white people having difficult conversations, and you were maligned from Black people saying you're not Black enough. You can't have
Right.
an opinion on this. You
Right.
don't you
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah. You're right. I mean, because, I find myself, I don't know. Look, I look back on, I hear all of these conversations about things like white privilege and black underprivilege. And, you know, I, I feel like I've kind of seen both sides, but to be very honest, I think it to in some regard, I myself sort of benefited from white privilege, and I'll explain that.
Mhm.
Mean, again, looking back at my early upbringing, I was in the city. I was going to a very mixed race school that had a fairly decent reputation, for their educational system. I mean, it was decent. But if my mother and my stepfather hadn't been white, if they hadn't had the means to be able to relocate me into a situation where they felt like I would have maybe had some better educational opportunities,
Mhm.
had we been poor. And the reason I say haven't been white is because we moved, and I'll share another story with you, but we moved into a white culture, and they were just immediately socially accepted. Now, I
Mm.
mean, I probably got the side eye a little bit, but and it was more difficult for me, and I didn't share a lot of that really with my family growing up. I didn't really tell my parents, the things that were said to me or the way that I felt, and to be honest, they never really asked. I think that they assumed that I was okay, and I would say something if I wasn't. And in all fairness, I probably should have said things, um, along the way. But, so again, my parents had the means to be able to relocate us, and they had those means because they were both raised with a fairly solid educational background, that afforded them the opportunity to get decent jobs, and without discrimination and other factors, and they
Yeah,
were
I
able
mean,
to
had
locate.
had had your stepdad been Black or had both of your parents been Black, that would have this would be a different story.
Probably, yeah. I mean, I had a
Even
conversation.
with the same education. With the
Yeah,
same education, with the same they wouldn't have chosen that neighborhood. They wouldn't have felt comfortable to move to that neighborhood perhaps.
that's
They
funny that
wouldn't have
you say
been
that.
yeah, they wouldn't have been open-minded to go, "Well, let's move there. That makes sense."
It's funny that you say that, Meredith, because I don't remember how I might have been 10, or 10, 9, 10, 11, something like that.
Mhm.
But I remember I was riding my bike one time through the neighborhood, and this Black family, which was an unusual sight,
Right.
to be honest,
Yeah.
in the neighborhood that I grew up in. But this black family stopped, and they stopped me on the street, and of course I kept my distance a little. I didn't want to get close to the car or anything, but there was a black man and woman in the car and two black children in the back seat, and they kind of stopped and they rolled down their window and they said, "Hey, like, can we ask you a question?" And I thought that was a little strange, but I said, "Sure." And they said, like, "Can you tell us a little bit about, the neighborhood? Like, are you comfortable living here? Like, is it a nice place to grow up? Or, like, how long have you lived here? Did you grow up here?"
Mhm.
And I said, "Yeah, I've lived here for quite a few years." And I mean, yeah, it's okay. I mean, for me, it was just my norm, so I didn't really know any different, you
Right.
know. But then it's like, and they said, "Oh, the dad said, yeah, like we've been looking, because they were coming from the city." And they said, "We've been looking to kind of move out into the suburbs and stuff, but because of our race, we were just maybe a little concerned that, we weren't sure how welcoming it would
Right.
be."
Yeah.
And I mean, at that age, at 9 or 10 or whatever, I didn't really, I didn't, I didn't absorb that.
You didn't
I
appreciate
didn't
for
understand.
what was yeah, you didn't appreciate what
I
those
didn't
people were
appreciate the
asking. Yeah.
magnitude of
Yeah.
that. It's like I look back on it now, and obviously I don't know that they opted to move there, because I don't remember there being other black families. It was
Right.
a small community, so I don't
Right.
know that they opted to move there. But just the fact that they felt that they had to stop and ask somebody else that looked like me whether it was going to be appropriate or comfortable or welcoming for them to be able to raise their children. I mean, they obviously had the means to be able to do it, or they wouldn't be looking in
Right.
the area, would be my guess. But to feel like, even if we have the means to move here, are we going to be welcome? And are we going to be safe? Are our children going to be safe?
Well, I mean, 2
To
cities over, the answer would be absolutely not.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad, really, because like this family just wanted, a
Opportunity.
quality of life for
Yeah.
their children, an educational foundation and peace, and they wanted happiness and
A
safety,
yard.
and to think that they were basing whether or not they were going to be comfortable living in this community on what was said by a 10-year-old child riding her bike down the street.
Yeah.
It's sad that, that it comes to that. But again, as I was saying, I feel like I was afforded opportunities that I might not have had my parents not had, the money to be able to move me, or they hadn't had the educational foundation that afforded them to get good jobs and, that sort of thing. I mean, I could very well have been bused, into the inner city where, the school systems aren't as sound. They don't have the money to invest in the educational system, and there are a lot of broken aspects, and what would my life look like right now? What would my life, I went on, I mean, I graduated, and from a good school, and I went on to college and ended up with a doctoral degree, and I have a good job and can provide for my family. But what would my life have looked like had none of those things occurred?
Right.
So and I can sympathize. It's like I didn't, I'll be honest, I don't think I really grasped the full magnitude of, excuse me, I don't think I fully grasped the full magnitude of integrated schools, and trying to sort of level the playing field, if you will, and
Mhm.
things like, um, Well, for instance, I've heard friends and other white people say things like, I don't think it's fair that minorities get um, scholarships
Mhm.
ahead of people that maybe performed better than they did in school. Or I don't think that it's fair that somebody gets a hiring preference over me. Maybe they don't have as much experience, or, that I deserved that, they didn't deserve that. And, it's like I look back at my own opportunities, and it makes me think, well, and it wasn't until college, to be honest. I took a course in college for the very first time, and it had to do with, gosh, I'm drawing a blank. I've got so many thoughts going through my head right now.
Right.
But it was talking about the inner city school systems, and going dating back to, like, God, even dating back to, like, slavery and then post slavery, and how it is that people, Black people sort of got relegated to one area of society with little to no means and no education, and just sort of had to work within that community. And the funding was never there. The educational system, they had those separate but equal educational systems, that were never really equal.
Right.
And so, and just generations of families that, the parents went through these educational systems where they didn't have access to, maybe to good teachers, or to, to the books and all of the resources that some people in some of the suburbs have, you
Right.
know. Um,
As I like to call it, underserved.
exactly.
I've learned the importance of teaching our kids that those neighborhoods are underserved, because those children are born the same as my children, but with way less opportunities, teaching cleanliness of schools, parks departments, sports depart, yada. And we go up, it's the ghetto. People that go to school, they're up. They
Yeah,
only
they
have
don't care.
50% graduation rates. They're just whatever. But
They're
the fact of them,
trash. Yeah,
yeah, they're
they're
trash.
trash. They don't care.
They don't care.
They're not as smart,
Hmm.
And I like, intellect isn't about what you
Can
know.
do.
It's about what
Sure.
you're able to absorb, what you're
Right.
able to learn. And I think to myself, had I not had those opportunities to be able to go to a good school and get a good solid foundation, would I be where I am today? Because I may have, I can be as smart as I am, and I still wouldn't have had the kind of foundation that I had, you
Well, I
know.
mean, yeah, I just look at I mean, even like with my youngest who's 9, and, he had a bit of a reading struggle. So did I. I went to a very, white school, and they got me, boom, you're in, reading club to make sure that you're up to snuff, and Brock's in reading club, and up, he's not absorbing information. Up, we're going to put him in speech club. Up, we're going to give him some math. It's just one resource for free after another, after another, after another, to make sure that his standard is that of the school system that he's going to.
Right.
And if you took the same intelligent child and put him in an underserved neighborhood, I don't care if his mom, me, sits there and reads to him, and is home all day, and there's no services. Those services are not going to be provided for that same kid in a underserved, quote, bad neighborhood with, quote, bad schools.
Right. And I've had recent arguments, or we'll just call them discussions,
Mhm.
with people close to me, with that same regard, that, well, in all honesty, a lot of this, it takes place in the home. you know it's the parents' responsibility to ensure that the child is getting their educational needs met. It's the parents' responsibility to, when the child is struggling, to make sure that they're reading with them and taking extra time with them. And so the conversation kind of went, okay. So I said, so let me ask you this. I know where you sent your children for school.
Mm.
Um, if if all things, if all things were, if you could go back, if all things were equal, would you, knowing what you know, would you have sent your child to school in the inner city, you know, with the resources and, knowing that you can provide what you can provide in the home, would you be okay having sent your child? And, I got a lot of hemming and hawing, and finally the answer was no.
Right.
No, I wouldn't be comfortable sending my child, to school, under those circumstances. And it's like, well, you also have to bear in mind that, many of the parents of these children that are struggling in school and don't have the resources went to the same schools, got the same opportunities and educations, which may or may not have, there are success stories. So don't get me wrong.
Right.
There are people that have made their way, clawing and scratching and have made their way out of a really bad, educational upbringing, perhaps, or opportunities. But by far and large, um, you know, a lot of these parents have, that are raising these children in these circumstances, um, they don't have much to speak of.
Well, when you're
Many
talking
of them
about
are
this,
working.
yeah,
Yeah,
right, when you're talking about this, I just keep hearing the word, there's no safety net. There's no safety net to get those kids and go, "Oh, so your mom's not gonna sit there and read with you every night? That's okay. We have a safety net here at the white school, and we will make sure that you learn how to read. We will make sure that you know how to do speech and math and science. We'll make sure there are safety nets here, and there are no safety nets in the underserved neighborhoods where a lot of times, unfortunately, some of these kids and parents and teachers' first focus is getting these kids fed. And we saw that at the beginning of COVID, where the teachers and principals and that were like, holy crap, these kids eat here 2 meals a day, and they might be their only 2 meals.
yeah,
And everyone just points a finger, but we need to look back, like you were saying, to the beginning of all of this, where you couldn't buy a house in a white neighborhood if you were Black. They would push you to the same, all people of color would live in the same neighborhood with limited opportunity, limited mobility, limited services, if any. And if they did want to get, we're seeing upward of the last 10 and 5 years with um predatory lending for people of color with interest rates of 10%, even with good credit. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
there's so many levels of focusing people of color to failure and to staying in the same position. And I was laying in bed
and
last
blaming it on them.
right, and then turning around and saying, well, they just don't give a shit, they don't care, this is just why
They're
they're
not
in that
deserving.
situation.
Yeah,
They're not
they're not
deserving.
deserving.
Right.
They're going to bring our area down.
Right.
We
And
don't want them to infiltrate.
yeah, we don't want them to move in. Like, you can move in, but just not next to my house so much, and we've
and,
heard that for
and not
decades.
associating with my children or corrupting my
Right.
children. It's like I look back at me as a child, and I mean, I don't know if I would have had a different self-image if I would have grown up in a predominantly Black culture. I don't know, but I do know that I never really felt, you know, other than other people imposing it on me.
Mhm.
I mean, I can remember getting into fights with girls in school, and it was always the favorite to call me the N-word, or
Right.
that was
Easy.
always the jab, because
Right.
that was just the best, comeback, because I was different and I was an easy target. But um, short of other people pointing out my differences, I never really felt internally different, like I would become friends with these girls and have a lot of the same interests and a lot of the same feelings and emotions and a lot of the same fears and a lot of the same wants and a lot of the same dreams, and I didn't feel different. It was only that other people saw me as inherently different because my skin was a darker tone, and that was just always hurtful. Like, why can't people look at me and understand that I'm very much like they are? It's just that
Yeah.
my skin is darker in appearance. Short of that, I'm really not different.
I mean, the fact that we have to have these conversations, you almost feel silly saying the words.
Yeah,
Outside of my skin color, we're very similar. And, comma, I've based your entire judgment, way I see you on skin
skin color.
color. Like, are we still really doing this? Are we still doing and let me tell you what, in the community of skin color and hair type, it can be almost even more brutal.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna be interviewing the gals, uh, from the show the podcast Dear White Women, and it talks about using white women's privilege to change the world, basically, and cues and helpful hints to do so. And the one gal we were talking, and she was saying, well, if white women would stop hating themselves so much, and these gals are Asian, and they're married to black men, or the one is, I forget how it goes. Anyways, I'll be interviewing them more in depth. And so she was saying if white women would stop hating themselves so much, they would have more room, and stop being so judgy towards women of other races.
Yeah.
And that has literally sat with me for over a month now, just kind of wiggling all my parts of in my mind of, okay, how much judgment comes from this large portion of our female community, which is white, and it seeps out into judging other women, and then we want to be the most beautiful, we want to be the most opportune, vision of beauty and intelligence and what is desirable. Black women, I remember someone in my family going about J-Lo, look at the size of her ass, like so disgusted by J-Lo's ass. And I remember thinking, like, I remember having that pain body, like, where you just kinda cringe, because I remember thinking that was a very hateful thing to say,
Right.
and then I remember incorporating that into my mind of, "Yeah, look at it. It's so gross, like, that's so not what you want in your life,"
Well,
and
I'll be honest, Meredith. I mean, and I'm ashamed to say this, but growing up again in an all-white community and being,
Mhm.
and trying to fit in
Right,
and trying to be accepted, and just trying to be one of them.
right.
I can remember times of, having my friends like make black jokes
Ooh,
or me myself make
yeah,
black jokes,
easy, right.
and like laugh about it and because I wanted so badly to be one of them,
Anything
and
to
it
fit
wasn't
in.
that I wanted to be white
Right,
necessarily. I just wanted to be
blend.
I wanted to blend. Exactly. And I
Just
think if I
yeah.
had grown up in a more multiracial, multicultural, I wouldn't have felt the need to align myself one way or another. And I can't say that I'm proud that of some of the thoughts that I've had. I mean, there were times growing up that, I didn't like being black. I didn't want to look the way that I looked. I I mean, as a teenager, wanting a boyfriend and knowing that
Mm,
these boys didn't want to bring home somebody that looked like me to their mother, or to their father, even though they would tell me I was very pretty. Well, I was pretty for a black girl,
jeez.
you
Yeah,
know, and
yeah.
it's just very sad that, that I had to like diminish myself and who I was, and it's now I feel like having grown and learned and matured and whatnot, I'm a much bigger advocate, for people, not just black people. I mean, not just biracial people, but black people in general, because I just felt like, I feel like that's a part of me. I mean, this I can easily see myself in any of their lives or any of their positions, and so it is, but it is hard when, when your life experience has sort of been one way, but you're not you don't necessarily fit in as one of them, and on the other end of the spectrum, you're not, like for me, I mean, I'm not, nobody would consider me white,
Right.
but black people don't consider me black because I was kind of raised in a white society. But it's like you have to remember that all of the prejudices and the things that you've experienced,
So
you
have
know,
you.
the self-hatred, or not necessarily self-hatred, but the hatred that has been kind of put upon you for looking the way that you look. I felt that as well. I've
Yeah, it's been your
I've
experience. Yeah.
been there as well. It's just it's sad, and I can't help but wonder that the more that our society becomes sort of interracial, mixed race, that might not lessen some, because you know we don't have full bred people anymore. I mean,
Right.
we do, but it's not. It's becoming less and less.
Yeah.
People are from different cultures and different backgrounds and stuff, are beginning to marry and have children, and
And
um,
23andMe is waking people up to where they really came from sometimes.
yeah,
It's like, wait, what?
I mean, they might want to hide some of that,
Yeah.
I don't know, but I mean, I just think that, I have the unique position of being able to kind of see things from both sides, you
Yeah. And
know.
we were talking about that because I've mentioned, in this entire series, sometimes it's frustrating to be viewed as white, but this platform that I'm taking on and speaking to white people about their prejudices and racism and the decisions that they make and being more in tune with the way that they experience the world, it has to come from someone with, white skin, which is me. And, there's people that speak to the black community that have black skin. And I thought it was so interesting when you and I were talking because, maybe the bridge in all of this is someone that is biracial and can see both sides. And when they look at the dinner up from the dinner table, they see white and black and, whatever of color and of not color to go, I incorporate my body incorporates both sides and both are amazing and both are good and both are really the darn same. And what are we doing here? Like maybe that's why we need actually more biracial people to speak up and share their experience because they can articulate the black racism that they've felt, but they can see that, all white people aren't bad. I know so. My mom's white, so to speak, or my dad's white, or I lived in a white community. And so you can speak to both with which black nor white people can do that. We cannot speak to both. We cannot.
Right,
I
right.
cannot speak about the black experience at all, nor could a black person speak about the white experience. So I think it's really beautiful and and maybe that's why you do get flack to date because it's kind of like holy crap, you got to experience both and I didn't, and so you don't really get it. But what you do get is you even get the bigger visual. You get the bigger experience. To me, what we're having a conversation about right now is truly the bridge between both sides, if you will.
Yeah, I think that it's really a unique topic that I don't know, I don't know. I'm at a loss for words. I think you're absolutely I think you're absolutely right. I feel like, um, you know that it should be more of a topic of conversation. And I think the biggest thing that people should take away from the conversation is that people are really more alike than they are different,
Yeah.
you know, and
We don't want to see that. We want
you
to
can't
label
judge
and
somebody's
right.
intellect. You can't judge somebody's perceptions. You can't judge somebody's feelings or dreams or aspirations on what they look like on the outside, because somebody that looks very, very different from you may, be very much more like you than you would ever give them credit for. And I just feel like I've been able to see that from my own upbringing, even if it wasn't a realization that I necessarily had as a child. It's become more and more clear to me, the older that I've gotten, um, and the more that my worldview has expanded. You know,
Yeah. Well, I so appreciate you sharing with me, and we have so many different perspectives and stories over this series. And I hope that every time, someone listens to this podcast, shares the podcast, um, and it's one more step in the right direction of having these conversations. And I mean, just last night I was having the exact conversation that you said that you were having, which was, what do I do if 10 people apply for a job and the 11th most qualified person is Black? Do I give them the job? And I said, yeah. I mean, we're still having these conversations. We're still unsure as to what to do. We still want to say, no, you hire all 10 white people and you don't give the we still as a society want to stay in our comfort zone. And there was sidebar, but there was this person talking about the Meghan Markle thing, and everyone's like, "Why is she causing so much problems? Why can't she just be quiet? Why can't she
yeah,
just leave well
because
enough alone?"
she's the problem.
Yeah, she's the problem. And wow. And so I'm looking at and watching all these comments, and I'm just like, yes, wouldn't that be so convenient and so clean and tidy if Sarah and Meredith and all the other women of this podcast and Meghan Markle and Oprah and everyone would just shut up and leave well enough alone
And
and
everybody
not
can go on their, cozy way.
cozy way, and the queen can have her situation. And I was watching that Megan, whatever the heck her name is, that newscaster, and she was like, you know, the queen's husband is in the hospital and can't they just give him a break? And this, I'm like, what? Like, again, that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning. Make all these adults comfortable for their racism and their bigotry and the things that they've done and the things that they've said, and their hatred, and at the expense of a child, at the expense of moving forward, at the
Right.
expense of being comfortable. And sometimes we need to be uncomfortable. All of us need to get really uncomfortable with this conversation. And I just posted, stir Megan stir. Keep stirring that pot, because that's the only
These are
way
conversations that need to be had.
we
I
need to
mean,
have them, right? Enough with throwing all the dust under the rug, and praying that no one changes anything, and the white people, quote, lose their power, and we have to have equality, and and by the real sense of the word. And so I think that people like you sharing your story so that people really get it, that
yeah,
when they raise racist children or children that don't know about the Black culture or our Black history or Black skin colors that come in an array of colors, and have these conversations at the dinner table, because it really is. And I'm going to be talking about this in the future here in this series. It's really up to white people to raise white children to be grow up and be allies.
yeah,
And when my son, if he's at college and sees someone being racist to your child, or he becomes a police officer, and it is a situation where he's arresting someone of color, that he has, a kind heart and is not racist from birth, and knows the story and knows that, the whole situation, and is not come with those biases that create a dangerous place for people of color.
Right. And honestly, I think one of the biggest fallacies that needs to be overcome, because I see so much of it online and and elsewhere, is that when they're talking about white privilege, that assumption is that that means that because you're white, everything came easy to you,
Right, right.
that you were handed everything, and that is not the case.
It
And
just
when
means that
I
your skin
say,
color wasn't the problem.
yeah, when I say I had to work to get to where I am today, I had to work to get it, you know.
Yeah.
But the foundations that were presented to me from early on were foundations that would have made perhaps not been possible or less likely had my parents looked different or been raised in a different um, in a different cultural society, because um, I was afforded opportunities that I was able to build upon, and I did have to work very hard, and I respect that other people have to work very, very hard and maybe didn't always have easy beginnings, but they have to remember that the struggles that they had, and the challenges that they had getting to where they were not based upon the way that they looked from a skin color perspective.
Right.
you know
Yeah.
that's all there is to it when it comes to, I mean, that's the basic fundamental understanding, and I think that's something that's been really sorely misunderstood.
Yeah. I mean, I've had friends whom I love that are like, I was on food stamps. What white privilege are you talking about? And, you kind of have to dial it back. I think it's becoming more understood, hopefully, but it is important that people do understand that white privilege is, you might have had literally the worst childhood, you might be having a difficult life, but your skin color is not part of that difficulty. That's it. It's that simple.
Yeah, nobody's downplaying your struggles.
Yeah.
Nobody is downplaying how hard you had to work. Nobody's saying, and not every white person is a success story. And
Right.
I get that, but the difference is that there's already a strike against you if your skin is darker.
Yeah. We have to change
And
that. I mean, it just is,
yeah,
we can't keep having the same conversation for another 50 years. This literally has to stop for all people, for all of our children, for our society, for our economics. It's economically insane to have racism and to keep people down. And we, I think with conversations like this, which I so appreciate you coming on and talking to everybody and sharing your story, these are the conversations that move us in a forwardly direction, and people understanding and going, yeah, this doesn't make sense anymore. This is insane.
right.
And so I so appreciate you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. I appreciate you having me, and I've learned a lot from your podcast. So keep them coming. You're doing a great job.
Thanks so much. I appreciate you, hon.
All right. Take care, Ryan.
You too. Thanks for listening. If you would like to connect on a more personal level, head over to meredithwillits.com or on Instagram at Meredith with a Y for behind the scene footage and outtakes. Please subscribe and come back each week for more Meredith with a Y. Thanks again for listening. Cheers.